He was paid to guard a savage Zulu, but when he saw her, he knew he had to set her free. Snow had a way of swallowing sound in those woods. It deadened the hammering in his chest as he stepped from the sleigh, boots sinking deep, leather creaking in the brutal cold. The horses steamed like kettles in the dark, breath turning thick and white around their heads. Far above, the pines groaned under ice, an old, tired complaint that matched the feel in his bones. Erik Halvorsen pulled his coat closer and stared at the shack they had built away from camp. No windows. Just rough-hewn boards, a door barred from the outside, and a roof already bowing under the season's first heavy fall. Lantern light flickered through the seams like a trapped flame. "Heard you took the job," a voice said behind him. Erik turned. Birk the foreman stood by the sleigh, red beard crusted with frost, eyes narrowed against the wind. He was thick through the shoulders, a man made for hauling logs and trouble both. "Someone had to," Erik answered. His voice sounded calm, but his gloves were stiff with sweat. "You wanted her guarded, you've got her guarded." Birk spat into the snow, a dark stain in the white. "You watch her. That's all. She bolts, you shoot. We're paid good money to keep her here till the men from the company come through." Erik didn't ask again why the timber company cared about one woman they barely understood. He had asked once. The answer had come in shrugs and a few ugly words, all meaning the same thing. She's dangerous, she's not ours, and somebody important wants her contained. They called her savage before they even knew her name. 3 men, Birk muttered, shrugging up his coat. "Took 3 men on the river to bring her here. One still limping. Don't let her get close." Erik looked past him to the shack. Wind pushed loose snow along the ground like ghostly waves. His old rifle weighed heavy on his shoulder, the stock worn smooth by other winters, other watch posts. He had guarded felons, drunks, and deserters in his time. Men broken by cold and debt. Men who cursed him and begged him in the same breath. He had never guarded a woman alone in a place this far from mercy. "I'll manage," he said. Birk studied him a moment longer, eyes searching for weakness. Finding nothing he liked, he grunted and climbed back onto the sleigh. "Camp's a quarter-mile back that way," he jerked his thumb over his shoulder. "You come for rations every 3rd day. Until then you got your own woodpile and enough salt pork to see you through. Don't go wandering. Wolves been thick by the ravine." The sleigh lurched away, runners hissing over the packed road, bells dull in the frozen air. Erik watched until the dark swallowed horse and man in lingering sound. Then he turned toward the shack. For a moment he just stood, watching his breath rise in front of him like a low fog. Snowflakes clung to his beard, melting slow. He flexed his fingers, feeling how numb they already were. The lantern inside flickered again, a weak heartbeat behind the planks. He was paid to guard a savage Zulu, the company men had said. He was paid to watch a wild woman until others came and took her away. Payment had been laid on the table in neat stacks. Enough to cover the mortgage on his father's empty farm. Enough to buy tools, seed, a fresh start that didn't reek of sap and sawdust and men snoring in crowded bunkhouses. Enough to step off this frontier edge before it swallowed him. All he had to do was stand watch through one winter and keep the key in his pocket. He lifted the heavy bar from the shack door. The iron scraped against wood, a rough, dragging sound. He felt it in his teeth. For a moment he waited, listening. No sound from inside. He slid back the bolt and eased the door open. The warmth hit him first. Not much, but it was there, a thin pocket of heat from a small stove glowing in the corner. Smoke curled lazily up the pipe. The smell was wood and ash and unwashed wool. His eyes adjusted slowly to the dim. She sat on the floor near the stove, ankles shackled with a short chain bolted into the wall. A blanket lay around her shoulders, coarse and thin. The iron cuff at her wrist caught the light, a dull circle against dark skin. She looked up as he entered. He had braced himself for something wild. Teeth bared, eyes blazing, the sort of feral rage the crew had grunted about over their supper plates. Instead he found a gaze that was sharp and steady, with a patience that made him feel suddenly clumsy in his own body. Her eyes were deep, almost black, reflecting the small light like polished stone. Her hair was braided close against her head, neat despite the days of travel. Her jaw was set with quiet stubbornness. She didn't move. Didn't flinch, didn't reach for him, didn't spit or curse. She sat upright, hands resting on her knees, watching him as if weighing his worth. His throat felt strangely dry. "I'm your guard," he said because it felt wrong to say nothing. His voice sounded larger than this small space deserved. "Name's Erik." She didn't answer. A corner of his mind reminded him she might not understand his language at all. The company men had called her many things but never bothered with her name. He took off his mittens, flexing his fingers in the warmer air. His knuckles were red and cracked. He set the rifle in the corner, barrel angled up. Her gaze tracked the movement, then returned to his face. "Brought extra wood," he said, nodding toward the neat stack by the stove. "You'll need it tonight." Storms blowing in. Still nothing. Silence settled between them, thick but not empty. The crackle of the fire took up space where their words might have been. He closed the door behind him, dropping the bar back into place out of habit. The wind's howl softened to a dull murmur outside. The shack seemed even smaller with the storm shut out. 4 walls, 1 stove, 1 cot nailed along the far wall, and the iron ring that held her chain. He tried not to stare at the ring. Tried not to think about how deep the bolt ran into the timber. She moved first. Slowly she drew the blanket tighter, then lifted one hand and pressed it to her chest. "Nokuthula," she said. The word was soft, but it filled the room. Her voice was low, roughened maybe by cold and travel, but there was something steady there too. He frowned, leaning a little closer without meaning to. "Noku?" "Nokuthula," she repeated, clearer this time. Her eyes did not leave his. He realized then what she had given him. A name. Her name. He nodded once, feeling something loosen in his chest. "Nokuthula," he echoed, shaping it clumsily. It didn't sit right on his tongue, but he tried again until he got closer. "Nokuthula." A flicker passed over her face. Not quite a smile. More like the faintest easing of a line that had been drawn hard for a long time. Outside, wind snapped at the boards, shaking loose a spray of snow from the roof. The stove popped loudly as sap burst in the burning logs. He shrugged off his heavy coat and hung it on a nail. Beneath it, his flannel shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat that cooled too quickly. He moved around the small space, testing boards, checking the stove, doing the things men did when they didn't know what to say. She watched him, tracking every movement. Not fearful. Not trusting either. Just measuring. "Why here?" he asked finally, almost to himself. "Why bring you all the way north?" She tilted her head slightly, listening to the cadence of his words if not their meaning. Then she spoke, slow and careful, each syllable separate. "Taken from ship," she said. The accent shifted the shape of the words, but he understood. "Men. Guns. Again boat. River. Trees." Her hand moved toward the walls, the stove, the chain. She tapped the iron with 2 fingers. "Here," she finished. He swallowed. The men who had delivered her had said almost nothing. Just signed their papers, taken their money, and left their warning. "Dangerous. Do not get close. Do not listen." He had listened anyway. Not to them. He crouched by the stove and nudged a fresh log into place. The flames flared up, casting her face in copper and shadow. The chain clinked softly as she shifted her legs. "You cold?" he asked. She considered him, then nodded once. Some words needed no shared language. He took his blanket from the cot and shook it out. It smelled of old smoke and man sweat, the way everything did out here. Crossing the short distance, he stopped just outside the reach of her chain. He tried to hand it to her, arm extended. She glanced at the blanket, then at his hand. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Slowly she reached out and took it from him. Her fingers brushed his knuckles. Her skin was warmer than his, surprisingly so in this cold. He drew his hand back as if burned, unsure why. "Thank you," she said. 2 words. Clear. Careful. Not guessed but chosen. "You speak more than they think," he said quietly. "They not ask," she answered, eyes steady. "Only say. Not ask." He let out a breath that felt like it had been caged in his ribs for years. There it was. The simple truth of men like Bjerk and the company agents. It hung in the air with the tang of smoke and iron. Days settled into a hard pattern. He chopped wood until his shoulders burned and his hands ached. He hauled water from the creek when the ice was thin enough to break, filling buckets that froze at the edges before he brought them inside. He cooked the same gray meals over and over, salt pork, beans, stale bread softened in hot water. He kept the key to her chain on a leather thong around his neck. He reminded himself he was paid to keep it there. They learned pieces of each other's language, not by choice at first, but because silence had too sharp an edge when the storm winds howled and the nights stretched endlessly long. He pointed to the stove. "Stove." She nodded once. "Stove." She pointed to the flame. "Umlalo." "Umlalo," she repeated, slower. He tried again until his tongue found the right shape. "Umlalo." She nodded, that almost smile touching the corner of her mouth again. He pointed to the door. "Door." "Isango," she said. His gaze lingered on the heavy bar. Isango, he murmured. She watched him whenever his eyes stayed too long on the locks. There was no pleading, no begging for release. Just that same measured regard, as if she could feel his thoughts working against the weight of the key on his chest. One night, the wind rose to a scream, whipping snow sideways. The shack shuddered under each gust. Smoke coughed back down the stovepipe in brief bursts, stinging his eyes. He sat on the cot, boots still on, rifle across his knees. Sleep came in shallow pieces. Outside, trees cracked and groaned. Once he heard a long, thin howl ride the wind's back. Nokuthula lay curled near the stove, wrapped in both blankets, chain pooling black on the floor between them. In the flickering light she looked small, but that was a lie. He had seen strength in the way she held herself, in the quiet set of her shoulders. "You not sleep," she said suddenly. He glanced over. Her eyes shone in the dim like dark coals. "Storm," he answered. "Hard to rest with that noise." She lifted her head, listening. "Storm talk. Trees talk. Wolves talk. You listen too much." He almost laughed, a short, startled sound in his chest. "Maybe I do." She watched him a moment longer. "You run from something," she said carefully. "Storm outside. Storm inside." His fingers tightened around the rifle stock. He hadn't told her about the farm back west, buried in debt and snow both. He hadn't told her of the year the sickness took his younger brother, or the seasons that followed where nothing grew right in the soil, no matter how hard he worked it. He hadn't told her that guarding a stranger in chains was the price of not losing the last patch of land with his father's name on it. "What makes you say that?" he asked. She tapped her chest lightly. "Storm," she said, then tapped her temple. "Here also." He stared at her for a long time. The stove crackled between them. Wind pressed against the walls like something trying to get in. "What storm for you?" he asked. She looked into the fire, eyes distant. When she spoke, the words came slow, some in her language, some in his, all stitched together with careful intent. "Land," she began. "Cows. People. White men come. Guns. Talk. Paper." She frowned, searching for the right term. "They say they take. Tell us go. Many die." Her hand moved in a flat gesture, sweeping away. "I fight. I strike man. They take me. Chains." Her fingers found the cuff at her wrist. Again chains. He felt the room tilt slightly. The pieces he hadn't wanted to imagine now stood in the space between them, undeniable. "You fought back," he said. "I live," she answered simply. "Is same as fight." He looked at the iron ring bolted into the wall. The key on his chest felt heavier than any chain. "You think I'm the same as them?" he said before he could stop himself. She turned her head, studying him. Firelight picked out the planes of her face, the line of her jaw. "You hold key," she said gently. "You decide who you are." He slept badly after that. The days grew shorter. Frost crawled thick as wool over the shack's outer boards. His breath smoked even inside now. He split kindling until his hands blistered, then split more. Sometimes he heard distant laughter from the main camp when the wind shifted. The men there drank and cursed and swapped stories in their bunkhouse glow. He had shared their boards for years, shoulder to shoulder, a body among bodies. Now the absence of their noise pressed around him like palms on his ears. "You miss them," Nokuthula said one afternoon, watching him stare toward the hidden camp. "Miss the noise," he admitted. "Not always the men." "You alone before," she said. "Before me." "Most of my life," he answered. She poked at the ember bed with the iron tongs, sending up a brief shower of sparks. "Alone good sometimes," she said. "Too much alone," she let the sentence fall into the coals. "Too much alone turns a man strange," he finished for her. "Harder. Meaner." She nodded. "Or soft. Weak. Afraid." He thought of the company men with their clean hands and hard eyes. Not soft. Not weak. But afraid, maybe, of any world they couldn't measure and buy. "Why you guard me?" she asked, eyes on the fire. "You need money." "Yes. But why you?" He opened his mouth to give the easy answer. "Because they asked. Because they pay well. Because it's a job and I know how to stand watch." The words tasted thin. "Because I thought I could live with it," he said instead. "Standing here holding a key. I thought it was just work, like felling trees. Like any other burden." She was quiet a long time. When she spoke, her voice held no judgment. Only a kind of tired clarity. "You know now," she said. He didn't answer. It was 2 weeks later that the wolf came. He heard it before he saw it, a ragged growl just beyond the door, claws scratching at the wood. Nokuthula jerked upright, chain clinking. The stove's light danced wildly as the animal threw itself against the boards. "Stay back from the door," Erik said, grabbing his rifle. Something snarled, deep and desperate. The shack shuddered under the impact. Snow sifted down from the roof, thin white streams pouring through the chinks. He eased the bar up an inch, just enough to peer outside. Yellow eyes flashed in the narrow gap, wild and hungry. The wolf's muzzle was gray with frost, lips peeled back from its teeth in a soundless snarl. He slammed the bar down again. "Starved wolf," he muttered. "Must have followed the smell of meat." The animal circled the shack, scratching, whining, throwing itself against the walls. Nokuthula watched the door, muscles tight under the blanket. "You can hit from window?" she asked. "There's no window," he reminded her. She pointed to a knot in the boards near the roofline, where the wood had shrunk just enough to leave a narrow gap. "Climb," she said. "Shoot down. You do this before." He didn't ask how she knew. Instead, he hauled a crate under the wall, climbed up and pressed his eye to the crack. The wolf paced below, ribs showing through its winter coat, every angle sharpened by hunger. He shouldered the rifle, angling the barrel through the gap. The shot would be awkward, but he had made worse. His finger settled on the trigger. The wolf paused, head lifting. Its breath steamed in the cold, chest heaving. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Both of them far from their right place. Both of them driven here by needs they had not chosen. He fired. The bark of the rifle filled the shack, loud and immediate, ringing in his ears. Nokuthula flinched but did not cry out. Outside, a yelp cut short into silence. He lowered the rifle slowly. The wolf lay crumpled beside the wall, a dark splash blooming in the snow around it. He stepped out into the cold to be sure it was done. The air bit at his lungs. He knelt by the animal, hand on its flank. The fur was already stiffening. "Sorry," he murmured. The wolf's eyes were still open. He reached up and closed them with 2 fingers. When he came back inside, Nokuthula was watching him with an unreadable expression. "You kill fast," she said. "Quicker than starving to death," he answered. "Less suffering." She tilted her head. "For Wolf, or for you?" He hung the rifle back in its corner, jaw tight. Later, as they sat over a pot of weak broth, she spoke again. "You see me like Wolf?" she asked. The question cut cleaner than the wind. He started to answer reflexively, an easy denial ready on his tongue. "No, of course not. You're human, woman, prisoner, stranger. I see you in chains," he said. "And sometimes I see how a man could say it is kinder to end something than to leave it suffering like that." She held his gaze. "I not Wolf," she said. "I not your burden to kill or keep. Only to choose." "To choose what?" he asked. "What you are," she said simply. "Man with key. Or man who opened door." The key pressed cold against his skin through his shirt, a small circle of metal that felt like the center of the world. That night he did not sleep at all. He sat on the edge of the cot, elbows on his knees, watching the stove burn down to embers. Nokuthula breathed steadily near the wall, chain whispering softly whenever she shifted. He thought of the farm deed in his pack, folded and refolded until the edges frayed. He thought of his father's rough hands guiding his childhood fingers over the handle of an axe, teaching him the weight of work. "Land doesn't care for talk," his father had said once. "You show it who you are with what you do." He thought of the men who had brought Nokuthula here. The way they had laughed about the fight she put up. The bruises on her arms that hadn't come from any fall. He thought of the word savage. How easily it had rolled from their mouths. How hard it was now to fit it over the woman who shared this small space with him. The woman who spoke of storms inside and out with the same measured calm. By dawn, the decision sat in him like a stone at the bottom of a river. Heavy. Immovable. Not flashy, not heroic, just there. He rose quietly and crossed to the stove, feeding it a small piece of wood. The embers brightened. Nokuthula stirred, eyes blinking open. For once there was sleepiness in them, a softer edge. "Morning," he said. She watched him, senses waking faster than her body. "Something change?" she said. "Yes," he answered. He reached under his shirt, fingers closing around the key. The metal was warm from his skin. He pulled it free, the thong rasping lightly against his neck. Her gaze dropped to the small circle in his hand. Then returned to his face. "You sure?" she said. "Not a question." "Not really." "Not sure of anything," he admitted. "Except that I can't keep doing this. Not like this." "You lose money," she said. "Land?" "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I lose something else if I don't." He crossed the floor slowly, every board creak loud in his ears. He sank to one knee beside her, the chain lying between them like a question. Her wrist was slimmer than his thumb. The iron cuff circled it loosely, rubbing the skin raw at one point where it had chafed. He hesitated only once, thumb on the key's ridges. "If you go," he said quietly, "you go fast. There are men in camp who'll hunt you if they find out. The river heads south. There's shelter in the draws. Follow the ravine, keep to the trees. Don't cross open snow if you can help it." "You help me," she said. "They hurt you." He met her eyes. "They already have. They just paid me for the pleasure." She studied him for a long heartbeat. Something in her gaze softened, then sharpened again with resolve. "Do it," she said. He slid the key into the lock. The metal turned with a tiny final click. If you enjoyed, please subscribe and comment what country you're watching from. See you in the next one.